On this episode of Astronomy Toronto, we'll talk about observing the night sky this summer, especially looking at the planet Mars. Well, hello again and welcome to Astronomy Toronto. My name is Randy Attwood. I'm your host as well as the president of the Toronto Centre of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. Well, the summer is here again, and as we do every year here on Astronomy Toronto, we like to talk about what you can see in the summer skies. The summer is certainly an opportunity for everyone to get away from the bright city lights, go out camping or up to the cottage, and whenever it's clear, one looks up and just is amazed by the beauty of the summer sky. Well, we certainly can appreciate that, and we're going to talk a little bit about what you can see in the summer sky in the next couple months. We've got two guests on the show today. We're going to be talking about not only some of the things you can see in the summer sky, but especially Mars. Mars is in a very good position for observing this year. My first guest is an amateur astronomer. He's been on Astronomy Toronto many times before. I'd like to welcome back Michael Watson of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Very nice to be here again.
Well, Michael is an avid amateur, and he gets out of the city as much as possible in the summertime to observe the summer sky. As a beginner, Michael, what would I be looking at the summer sky, say, from my cottage sometime this summer?
Well, I think the thing that most people see most often in the summer is the Milky Way. The summer really is the time to see the Milky Way. A lot of people, although they know the term, have never actually seen the Milky Way, and what it is a broad band of light crossing the sky from one horizon to the other horizon, and it's really quite beautiful.
Now, why can't we see it from the city?
Well, it's mainly because although it's fairly bright as seen from a dark site, again, the light pollution from the city, something that we talk about quite often on this show, really makes it completely invisible. You can see the brighter stars and the planets and the moon from the city, but really nothing else. And because the Milky Way contains millions of fainter stars, it's really impossible to see from the city, or even within, I would say, 30 or 40 kilometers of the city. You've got to get into a dark sky to see it.
Now, it looks milky to the naked eye, Michael. If I took binoculars, would I be able to begin to see some detail in the Milky Way?
Well, absolutely, and that's exactly what Galileo did in the 1600s. You turn a telescope or binoculars on the Milky Way, and this seeming faint band of light, which really contains absolutely nothing, then starts to resolve into individual fainter stars, stars that are too faint to be seen with your unaided eye, but become visible in binoculars.
Well, Michael, you've taken a lot of photographs of the sky. We're going to look at one slide right now, which is of a picture of the Milky Way I believe you took last summer or the summer before. This is pretty well thousands of stars captured on film.
Well, that's right. This is the heart of the center of the Milky Way. This is a view that is similar to what you would see with the naked eye. And there are three bright stars here, one in the middle upper part of the screen, one in the middle to the left, and one to the lower right. Those stars are the so-called summer triangle and are very prominent, and they're the brightest three stars almost directly overhead.
Next slide, we're going to see one of the constellations, what we call the summer triangle, or not the summer triangle, the Northern Cross, summer cross, and it's called Cygnus.
Cygnus the Swan is one of the beautiful constellations, and it's called the Northern Cross because the brightest stars are in fact in a cross shape. This is the center of the brightest part of the Milky Way in the summer sky, and there's a very interesting star, which is a very bright star, right on the left. In the middle left is the star Deneb, which is 1,600 light years from our Earth. The interesting thing about this star, and when you're looking at it, just think about this. If it were as far away as our sun is from the Earth, and it were just rising, it would stretch from the horizon a third of the way up to the zenith. It is that enormous. It's one of the largest stars known.
Very big and very bright and hot, too.
Well, absolutely. It's very bright and very hot.
If we look at the next slide, we'll see the most beautiful part of the Milky Way, which is what you would see if you face south. This is looking right towards the center of the Milky Way, and this picture, which just amazes me, Michael, was taken by yourself in Australia in April, I believe.
Yes, that's right. Now, we should explain that the Milky Way really is nothing more than the galaxy in which we live, which is sort of a pie plate or dish-shaped agglomeration of millions and millions of stars. And if you stand out and look south, just say a third of the way or a quarter of the way from the horizon all the way up to the zenith, in other words, not too far above the southern horizon, you'll see the brightest part of the Milky Way, which is in the constellation Sagittarius. And you'll see these nice dark lanes and rifts, which really are clouds of foreground dark obscuring gas, which block out the light from millions of stars beyond. This is the direction of the center of the galaxy, which is located about 30,000 light years away.
It's beautiful. Once you become used to and experienced astrophotographer, you can come up with some very beautiful capturing of objects in our sky. In the next slide, we have a picture that Michael took just recently of some of these objects facing towards the center of the Milky Way. Could you tell us what these are, Michael?
Well, these are two of the most famous objects to amateur astronomers, and are well known to people who aren't that familiar with astronomy as well. The large pinkish object, sort of slightly to the right, is the Lagoon Nebula, which is a huge cloud of glowing gas. It's hydrogen gas, and it actually is red. Although it looks white to the naked eye or in binoculars, it is really red because that's what hydrogen looks like. There's a slightly fainter one to the upper left of it called the Trifid Nebula, and these two objects are right in the heart of the Milky Way and really quite beautiful.
So if you knew where to look and say we're using binoculars, you'd be able to see some fuzzy patches of light, but you wouldn't be able to see the colors.
You wouldn't be able to see the colors, but these objects are so bright that in binoculars they're really quite beautiful. And we certainly urge people to go out and to a science shop, buy a little star atlas, which you can get for $5 or $10, find where these objects are located by reference to the stars, go out in a dark sky with binoculars and look at them, and they're really gorgeous.
One thing that people will be able to look at in July is something that doesn't happen very often, where the moon passes in front of a bright star. That's called an occultation. Tell us about the occultation this month.
This is something that's very special. The moon, as most people realize, moves around the sky once per month, and in the course of its travels around the sky, it sometimes passes in front of bright stars and planets. That event is called an occultation. The moon is said to occult or pass in front of the star. Now, there's one particularly striking event, as you mentioned, and it occurs on the evening of Thursday, July 17th. Just after midnight for observers in the Toronto area. The times differ slightly across Ontario. What observers will see is this. If they go out and stand, you have to have a very low horizon and look toward the south, just slightly west of south. You'll see the moon, which is almost full but not quite full, low in the sky, and just to the left of the moon, the lower left, is a brilliant, brilliant star called Antares, which is the brightest star in the constellation of Scorpius. And at about 16 minutes after midnight, which is really sort of the Friday morning, Thursday evening, Friday morning, observers with the naked eye or looking with binoculars will see the moon approach that star, and then instantaneously the moon will cover it and the star will disappear. The reason that an occultation is fascinating, quite apart from the fact that you see two bright objects in the same part of the sky, is that an occultation of a star by the moon is the most nearly instantaneous phenomenon that the human eye can ever observe, and it's just fascinating. You and I have both seen many of them.
It is the fastest thing I've ever seen, and an hour after the occultation, we'll see the star appear on the other side after the moon has moved by.
That's right, the moon moves in its path. Now, it's difficult to see this point should be made that when the star disappears, there's a little bit of unilluminated portion of the moon, the so-called dark limb or dark edge, and the star disappears behind it. So the star will not actually move up to the bright part of the moon. It will be just a little bit off the bright part of the moon when it disappears. When it reappears, it will reappear from behind the bright edge, and you won't really be able to see it until it moves just slightly away.
So that is the night of July 17th, 18th.
That's right.
What about August? What can we look forward to seeing this August?
Well, there are two things that occur pretty much every August. The first is the great Perseid meteor shower. People who don't really know much about astronomy, but who do get out into dark skies, are familiar with the fact that there are many meteors that can be seen, bright flashes of light across the sky, which we have always called from childhood shooting stars. And of course, what they are is little particles of sand, grains of sand, very tiny, much smaller than my fingernail, which are moving in orbits around the sun. They hit the atmosphere of the Earth and they burn up and they cause these streaks across the sky. And the best meteor shower of the year occurs within a few days of August 12th, which this year is on a Tuesday. So starting, say, the weekend before, observers can get out, starting, say, about midnight, and look to the east. You'll see the familiar W of the constellation Cassiopeia. And if you look around the sky in its entirety, you will see meteors at the rate of perhaps 1 per minute, usually, radiating from near the constellation Perseus, which is just below Cassiopeia. And they'll be radiating in all directions from that point. That is what's called a meteor shower, and the Perseid meteor shower occurs, as I say, within a few days on either side of August 12th. So for a period of about a week, if you get nice dark skies at some point during that time, go out and watch these meteors.
Another thing which many people who've camped in the summertime would have seen are northern lights or aurora borealis displays. How do we know when there's going to be a northern lights display?
Well, professional astronomers and those who monitor the sun know, because the aurora, or the northern dawn, that's what it means in Latin, is caused by disturbances and magnetic storms on the surface of the sun. And when those particles strike the Earth's atmosphere, they interact with the Earth's magnetic field and produce this very brilliant light display. And it's called the aurora borealis, and we very often see it in the month of August. Look generally toward the north in the sky, and you may see shimmering lights and curtains and so on of light.
We have a slide of the northern lights, which again is a sort of haphazard thing. You may see them or you may not, but again, you have to be away from the city to see a good northern lights display.
Well, that's right. Now, this photograph really shows what the aurora can look like. I took this about 1.5 years ago, and it really is quite pretty. You can see colors, you can see the bright stars, of course, through the aurora, and they move, and they can move very quickly, even from just moment to moment. So it's really something to go out and try to see.
Well, Michael, 1986 has been certainly the year for astronomers, and we all had a chance to see Halley's Comet earlier this year. Tell us a little bit about Halley's Comet while we get the slide of the beautiful slide of Halley's Comet that you took from Australia up now. Tell us about the comet now, in month of July, August. Who's going to be able to see it?
Well, surprisingly, in spite of the fact that we haven't heard anything about the comet for a couple of months, it still is visible in binoculars and in small telescopes in the evening sky. It's getting further and further away and fainter, and it's going to move in behind the sun in July. When it re-emerges from behind the sun in the morning sky in August and September, it'll be too faint to be seen except with large telescopes. But here we see a photograph that I did manage to take during the time of a total lunar eclipse on April 24th from the center of the Australian outback in very dark skies. And this, to me, was the best show that the Halley's Comet put on. It had a nice tail, a very brilliant, bright head, and that, just to give you a point of reference, that bright head there toward the left of the screen was about as big as the full moon. So it really looked really quite large, and in binoculars, the tail was beautiful. This was really the treat for the entire appearance of Halley's Comet this time around, and we won't get another view like that of Halley's Comet until the year 2061.
Although we hope that other comets will be coming around before then.
Well, normally you get about 3 bright comets in every decade, and we're certainly overdue for one.
Thanks a lot, Michael, for joining us
Nice
today.
to be here again.
So hope everyone has a chance to get out and observe the summer sky. We'll be back in a moment on Astronomy Toronto to talk about the real treat in the summer sky of 1986, and that is the planet Mars. Back and joined now by Bruce Renton, who is also an amateur astronomer with the Toronto Centre of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. And Bruce, this is the 10th anniversary since Viking landed on Mars. This year we got a great opportunity to take a look at and observe for ourselves the planet Mars. Why is Mars so interesting?
Well, it's because it's a planet that it's rather unusual in that it's one of the very few planets where we can actually see some detail right down to the surface of the planet, and that it's also our closest neighbor.
And it's going to get pretty close this year. 60 million kilometers doesn't sound very close, but that's pretty close for the distance between Mars and Earth to get.
Yeah, usually Mars is very distant, and that's in that it's such a very vague kind of planet covered in dust, and our Earth's atmosphere makes it very difficult to be able to see any kind of detail on Mars. So it's when it gets close to us, we want to take advantage of that opportunity to see whatever we can.
But it should be pointed out that it is the closest planet that we can see from the planet Earth with a telescope. So when it gets this close, it gets pretty interesting. Mars, I guess, has always been a very interesting planet, not only for observing, but also in literature. It goes back a long way.
Well, with the H.G. Wells story, of course, that was an experience that a lot of people before our time, remember. And also, in addition to those kind of Martian stories, were the fable, the myth of all of the canals on the surface. So the Martians were busy in the background building a civilization ready to launch an attack on Earth.
You hear more about Martians than you do Jovians or Venusians, say. If anyone's going to attack the planet Earth from another planet in our solar system, it's going to be a Martian, right? We have a slide of what an alien might look like if he came from the planet Mars, with War of the Worlds, written by H.G. Wells, and then the Mercury Theater in 1938, Orson Welles, and that dramatization really has made Mars quite a fictional planet. In the next slide, we have a picture of what you were talking about, Bruce, of all those canals. Could you tell us about them? Who designed them, or who thought of these canals?
Well, it was an astronomer, a rather famous astronomer back in the late 1800s, 1870s. His name was Percival Lovell, who did a tremendous amount of observing of Mars. In fact, the Lovell Observatory was named after Dr. Lovell, and he was an absolute fanatic about discovering these so-called canals. He discovered over 500 canals on the surface of Mars.
But these canals were more an optical illusion, weren't they?
Well, the mind has a tendency to draw and cluster together things that aren't really there, and he really took advantage of that ocular phenomena.
Now, this was a result of, say, this atmosphere problem we've been talking about. Whenever you have to look out at a planet or anything up in the sky, you have to look through the Earth's atmosphere. And was it the turbulent atmosphere that caused all this
Right.
optical illusion?
That's the problem, Randy, is that the Earth's atmosphere is our block to seeing out into the solar system, so that we have to look through that mess to be able to see features on the surface of Mars.
Well, 10 years ago, 2 pairs of Viking spacecraft were landed on Mars. 2 spacecraft went down, soft landed on Mars, unmanned, of course, and 2 other Viking spacecraft were in orbit. And really, it was the first really clear view that we had of Mars, because I guess if you can't see it from the Earth, you have to send your cameras to Mars and radio back the pictures. We learned a lot from the Viking spacecraft, didn't we?
Well, also there was a richness of the color. Back in the 60s, we had the Mariner spacecraft, but the Vikings gave us a really good crack at seeing some beautiful detail in live and living color. And not only were the mother spacecraft flying around and orbiting, but while they were busy clicking away pictures for many years, the pods landed on the rocky surface of Mars. And as a matter of fact, it was lucky that they landed intact, and that was the whole excitement of that mission, is landing on the surface of Mars and finding a place where they could land safely.
Well, you brought several pictures of what Vikings sent back of Mars, Bruce. The first picture, I believe, is what a traveler to Mars would see as the spacecraft was coming in to end up in orbit around Mars. Very red, as we have said. It looks like a very red star, but also very covered with whitish snow-like stuff and craters and valleys.
Well, it's a fine dusting of carbon dioxide and a smaller quantity of water, frost, that's covering the surface, as well as being obscured by clouds.
The next slide here, we see an incredible valley called Valles Marineris.
Well, features like this are things that are very exciting because there's nothing quite like it on Earth. If you think about the Grand Canyon, and if you're awed by that kind of experience of something that's about 15, 18 miles wide and half a mile, 3/4 of a mile deep, when you're looking at that valley on Mars, it's something that's 150 miles wide. Absolutely phenomenal.
And that valley would, I believe, stretch from New York to San Francisco.
That's right. So it makes anything on Earth just look puny.
If we look at the next slide, we see one of the mountains or extinct volcanoes, I believe, on Mars, Olympus Mons. And this is an incredible volcano compared to, say, Mount Everest.
It's not a phenomenon, of course, which you could ever hope to see from the Earth with a telescope, an amateur telescope, or even an observatory telescope, because it's just too small to be resolved. But it's so big, 15 miles high, versus our biggest feature on Earth, which is Mount Everest, only 5 miles high, that it's creating its own cloud-like phenomenon. So you can actually see the clouds on the surface of Mars around that volcano.
One of the things I believe we learned about Mars from the Viking missions was the fact that there used to be flowing water on the planet millions of years ago. And the next slide shows what looked like ancient river valleys on the planet Earth. But as you see, they look like water used to flow here, but that is a picture from Mars, isn't it?
Right. Well, about 10 years ago, I was involved in lunar science work in Texas, and there was a lot of debate as to whether these pictures represented volcanic activity or the movement of water, and it's now been pretty well accepted that it's the movement of vast amount of water that
So where's
cut
all the
these
water
valleys.
now?
It's probably locked as permafrost in the soil and rocks below.
Well, those are pictures from above Mars, the Viking spacecraft in orbit around the planet. 2 spacecraft landed on Mars and sent back some incredible pictures. The next picture shows what it would look like if you were standing on the planet Mars. And boy, it's pretty rocky and pretty red.
No, it's certainly not Arizona, Randy. And one of the things you have to think about is that if you were to stand on the surface of Mars, you wouldn't last for very long. First of all, you'd be bombarded by ultraviolet radiation, because standing on the surface of Mars is like standing at 20 miles up in the upper atmosphere. If you're on top of Mount Everest, you're 5 miles high and you can barely breathe. Imagine being 20 miles high. So that...
What about a temperature?
Temperature, the hottest it ever gets on Mars is about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Generally, the coldest is about minus 150 Fahrenheit, so it's not a very pleasant place.
We've got another slide here of the planet Mars taken from one of the Viking spacecraft. And these spacecraft, they lasted for quite a while. In this slide, we'll see the red rocks and all the detail that you could see on the planet. And they actually had a fund going to try to support the Viking spacecraft for a long time, didn't they? You know, to keep it funded, because they were going to just shut them down.
That's right. Well, there was so much information coming on, and it was the spacecraft kept on going far longer than they ever anticipated, and there was just so much information coming through.
On the right side of this slide, Bruce, I think we can see some of the little ditches that the Viking lander with an automatic shovel dug.
That's right.
Looking for life, isn't
That's
that right?
right. Unfortunately, nothing was ever discovered, and it was all of the phenomena which they were able to uncover were strictly of chemical origin.
Well, this summer, as we said, is a perfect opportunity to look at the planet Mars. If I wanted to look at Mars tonight, where do I look?
Okay, a couple of simple things. First of all, what you want to do is look for an extremely bright red star. That's how the ancients first came across Mars and recognized that it was an unusual object, is looking for that bright red star. What you do is you look to the southeast and look for a bright red star which rises about 10:30, and it's that easy.
All right, now that's with my naked eye. What if I had a pair of binoculars?
Okay. Unfortunately, binoculars won't give you anything. You'll just see a brighter red star, but you have to move into a telescope, a fairly good-sized telescope, to be able to pick up some features of the surface of Mars.
All right, let's say I have a fairly good-sized telescope, say with a fairly large mirror or whatever. What do amateur astronomers who like to look at the planet Mars, what do they see? What is so interesting about looking at the planet Mars?
Well, it's because it's a challenge. It's not something where, if you've ever seen a photograph of Mars, that you're going to see a lot of those same details. You're not going to see craters. You're not going to see these huge valleys. But it's the changing phenomena that day by day or week by week you start to see. Perhaps the ice cap, which is one of the most prominent features, which is certainly visible now, and I observed it a couple of days ago. And the deserts on the surface of Mars, which are gray or green, and you see those expand and contract.
And Mars is turning. It has a day of about 24 hours or so. So if you looked at it earlier in the evening and then later in the evening, within about 8 hours difference, you can see the changing features because of the change, can't you? There are a lot of dust storms on Mars, too. Can you see the dust storms?
Yeah.
Can you see any evidence of that?
One of the techniques that you can use as an observer is using filters to enhance your ability to see objects on Mars, or features of Mars. What I suggest you use is a red filter to see the surface features, to pull out the deserts and the what are called the mare, the dark features, and then use a blue filter to see the polar cap and the dust storms.
Okay, we have another slide here, Bruce, which shows us what you were talking about, the changing size of the polar cap. This picture will show us on the left springtime, when the springtime on Mars where the polar cap is larger, and it actually gets that small in summertime?
Sure does, but that won't be until well into the fall. So right now...
And and I should say spring and summer on Mars, not...
Yeah, that's right. But so summer on Mars is going to be sometime in the fall, late fall.
In our next shot, we'll see what very good detail of some views you'll see through a telescope, but this is through a pretty large telescope to see this
that's
kind of
right.
detail.
And ideal conditions, and you have to do a lot of observing and just an excellent seeing conditions to be able to pick up that kind of detail.
Looking at the planet Mars this summer should be quite interesting for a lot of people, not only to look back at Viking and what we know about the planet Mars, but also to get a chance and look forward to, say, future colonies on Mars. They're already talking about landing on Mars after the year 2000. Thanks very much, Bruce, for coming today and talking about Astronomy Toronto. And thank you for watching Astronomy Toronto. For anyone who doesn't have a large telescope, and I would imagine that's most of the people watching today, the Toronto Centre of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada holds an annual Astronomy Day in the summer. This year it's on Saturday, August 16th. And if you want to take a look at the planet Mars through a large telescope, or look at planet Saturn, Jupiter, and the Moon, we're going to be holding it at Harbourfront on Saturday, August 16th, just after dusk. All right. So we'll welcome you there, Saturday, August 16th at Harbourfront. Thanks again for watching Astronomy Toronto. Hello again. Welcome to Astronomy Toronto. On this edition, we'll be looking at observatories